Last year I covered the little known Doctor Who animated oddity known as the Infinite Quest. However, I got a lot of comments from people confused about remembering another animation about the Doctor in Area 51. Well, I can reassure you that wasn't some group fever dream. It actually exists. Yes, today I'm going to be covering the 2009 animation Dreamland, which was one of the select few Doctor Who stories released in the gap year between series 4 and 5. Created as a 6-part serial on CBBC, Dreamland sees the Doctor travel to the mysterious Area 51 and encounter two warring alien races to the backdrop of the Cold War between the United States and Soviet Union. However, Dreamland has always been widely panned by critics and Doctor Who fans alike for its janky 3D video game cutscene animation and questionable voice acting performances. Usually at this point I would question whether there are redeeming parts of the serial that make it underrated or unfairly hated, but I can't bring myself to. Dreamland is unquestionably bad. It's the lowest point of the Davis era by a long shot, which I know is a bold statement, but let me try and prove that to you. So without further ado, it's time to dive deep into Doctor Who's animated abomination, Dreamland.
Yeah, sure, if the Reds don't nuke us first.
The Reds, Manchester United.
As we all know, one of the most famous UFO encounters is the Roswell incident of 1947, where a nuclear test surveillance balloon crashed on a ranch and unintentionally sparked one of the biggest conspiracy theories in history. People were, and still are, convinced it was actually an alien spaceship which crashed in the desert, especially with the intense cover-up at the time, only making the US government seem more suspicious for hiding the truth. All of this obviously inspired a litany of fictional interpretations, usually taking the route of saying it actually was an alien crash, because it would be a bit boring otherwise. Dreamland is another in that long line, opening with a spaceship getting shot down and crashing on Earth. It's such a short and therefore pointless cold open. You may as well just have the opening credits right at the beginning. I just find it strange. However, the action then shifts to Nevada, with the Doctor landing at a diner and delivering one of the worst lines in Doctor Who history.
Howdy there, partners.
That's just no. But I don't blame Tennant. At this point he still wasn't hugely keen on doing ADR or voiceover stuff, so he was in a bit of an awkward position with a terrible line to say. And yes, before we go any further, I suppose I have to address the horrible animation in the room. This serial was animated by the studio Little Loud, whose portfolio makes for some truly bizarre reading, a hectic mix of flash games and minor animation work. I have no idea why they were brought in for this, but it's safe to say the animation is an absolute disaster. Whilst it is possible to make 3D animation good like the Clone Wars did, this is incredibly rigid and awkward to watch. It's more like a PS2 cutscene than a Doctor Who animated adventure. After the Infinite Quest, you would think it would be better to continue on with 2D, so I don't at all think they justify this change. It makes for one or two interesting moments, but aside from that, everything is jarring. The lip sync, the movement, and even the character models are all an unparalleled disaster. I actually just came across the initial character designs for Little Loud's pitch to the BBC, and they're so much better, a lot more stylistic and polished, but they're apparently scrapped for having long render times, which really annoys me, because this is what we ended up getting instead. Well, at least they learned their lesson from Dreamland and never tried this style again, right?
As soon as the effect of the mist was known, this whole area was cordoned off.
God damn it, why do I even bother? At the diner, the Doctor discovers a mysterious object supposedly from the Roswell crash, which destroys the lights for some reason, summoning Mr. Agent Smith Man in Black over here. Hey, I guess if you're going for one 50s alien trope, you have to go for them all. It's like Pokemon. Despite the most wooden man in the world, Jimmy, trying to act all hard and stop him, Mr. Dread just yeets him across the room, only for the protagonist to still escape. It's moments like these that make the animation so unforgivably janky. There's absolutely no fluidity, it's an assault on the eyes. If you're going to have fight scenes and frantic chase scenes, you either make sure it looks good in this style, or you just change the style completely. When it comes to Dreamland, it simply hopes you ignore moments like Jimmy's fall, where he ragdolls backwards and just lands on the floor completely rigid. It almost feels like an unfinished test animation rather than the real deal. It's extremely unpolished, which makes it very disappointing and almost uncomfortable to watch unfold. Jimmy apparently works at a ranch where cattle have been going missing or getting killed by something inhuman. This is again in line with popular UFO theories of the time, where farmers would come across dismembered cows with the only possible explanation being it was aliens who did it. Because what's the point in rational thinking when you can just slap the explanation of aliens on it? Much like the Roswell crash, Dreamland decides to embrace those kinds of explanations, as it turns out the killer is a Viperox battle drone, a weird bug-like monster that looks way too goofy to be terrifying. However, it's shot down by the army, who drop the bombshell that's taking the Doctor to Area 51. Cause you know, it's a real UFO cliche party over here. It does make a lot of sense to involve Area 51 in this storyline. I mean, if any single place on the planet is synonymous with aliens, it's that mysterious military base in the middle of the desert where you probably have to sign a confidentiality waiver just to go to the toilet. It's no surprise such a secretive location has influenced so much speculation from those who believe in aliens, so it is the most suitable place for this adventure to happen. It would feel like a wasted opportunity otherwise. Inside Area 51, the captive heroes meet Colonel Stark, who promises to mind wipe them. It's again something in line with the whole red tape atmosphere of governments and aliens, along with feeding into many people's paranoia of Area 51, so it's a nice touch, very reminiscent of things like MK Ultra. Even the Doctor can't talk himself out of this one before the evil green gas starts flooding in, although he's able to break out and flee the others. It's like the typical classic Who cliffhanger, setting up this big thing like, oh no, the Doctor is gonna die, just for everything to immediately be fine afterwards, which is always disappointing. It's also extremely cringe and unwelcome that the Doctor proceeds to make about 6 pop culture references in the span of a minute.
Of course there's a way out, there always is. Apart from in Star Wars, of course.
It's one thing to slip in a neat reference to something you like, but moments like this feel too reliant on the audience recognising what the Doctor is talking about and going,
I know what that is!
The heroes then find themselves being chased through the corridors of Area 51 in yet another awkwardly jarring sequence. I will admit I do like the design of the base itself. It's very dirty and grey, which feels realistic for the time period. This is still a military base at its core. It's not some super slick futuristic space station after all. Although I do find it funny that a top secret Air Force base capturing aliens would also have big neon exit signs. The trio are able to escape into a lab, however, where they discover a captive grey alien. At this point, it gets a bit frustrating to see so many cliches. It was fine to mix Roswell, Area 51 and all the Men in Black stuff, but to go even further and include a stereotypical grey alien seems a bit too far for me. Sure, it's good for world building by showing the base is experimenting on aliens, but it's like ticking off a checklist of things the viewer knows when it comes to these things, so it ends up just rubbing me the wrong way. It also turns out Colonel Stark is actually working for the villainous Lord Aslock, voiced by David Warner, who incidentally played an incarnation of the Doctor for Big Finish's Unbound series of What If stories. Just thought I'd mention that before someone else does in the comments. I'm one step ahead of you. It makes sense to have a human villain working in tandem with the alien villain, since it's pretty much a cornerstone of Doctor Who by this point. You see it constantly, whether that be the human lusting for power or being blackmailed by the alien. So this part of the story is a nice bit of familiarity to keep it very Doctor Who-y. The protagonists discover the ship from the Roswell crash, with Jimmy sounding so incredibly shocked.
I cannot be seeing that.
Alright, time to give him every BAFTA, Oscar and NTA. Come on, I mean, you may as well shut them all down at this point because nothing will ever surpass such a golden moment of acting. The Doctor manages to steal the ship, leading to an actually well-animated chase, as the Air Force tries to shoot them down. It's moments like these that show the strengths of this animation style. As long as it doesn't involve people, it looks pretty decent, which baffles me even more that they decided to go for this style, given how many people there are to animate. Despite crashing the ship, the protagonists stumble across an old mining town, where Jimmy is captured by a Viperox. Oh no, what a shame, they got Jimmy. I sure hope they don't kill him, that would be awful. Sadly for me, he's still alive, where he's interrogated by Aslock, who wants to know where the Doctor is. I mean, it makes sense. There you are minding your own business trying to do evil alien things, when suddenly a random guy shows up and starts to foil all your plans. It's not surprising you'd want to know who he is. This also allows for the typical parlaying scene we often get in Doctor Who, where the Doctor and the villain chat for a bit, allowing us to get more of a sense as to who the villain is and what they're up to. It gives a chance for the villain to walk away and leave the planet alone, although they never do. This time, Aslock implies the Viperox are only there to fight another alien, although Cassie ruins it before the Doctor can find out more. Honestly, Cassie and Jimmy are terrible one-off companions. They are genuinely useless in every form and only ever seem to get in the Doctor's way. I really dislike both of them. Thanks to Jimmy tripping over, we also find out that the Viperox have a queen who's been hatching eggs to create an army, because I guess you also have to rip off aliens while you're at it. Seriously, there's a shocking lack of originality in this story. It puts even Chris Chibnall to shame. And speaking of a lack of originality, there's even a minecart sequence. I feel like at some point in the future, kids will only know of old mining techniques through these stereotypical moments when there's an old mine. However, luckily the script doesn't overindulge itself with this trope, and the trio are immediately accosted by the Men in Black, who we find out are actually robots, representing the so-called Alliance of Shades, who we never actually ever learn anything more about. It's an interesting twist, adding a proper Doctor Who-y explanation to the persistent real-life mystery of shady Men in Black skulking around hiding alien involvement, because they themselves are acting in the interest of aliens rather than the government. However, before the episode can do anything interesting with these robots, they're shot by Jimmy's Native American grandpa, Night Eagle, who fortunately isn't given enough screen time to descend into too much of a stereotype. Night Eagle leads the trio to Rivesh Mantalax, the husband of the alien from earlier. He serves as a handy exposition machine, explaining the Viperox destroyed his world. I like the short flashback, even though parts of it are goofy and resemble a Zerg rush from StarCraft. It's only a brief cutaway, but the conflict has a good scale to it, and Rivesh's people suit the animation much better than actual humans do. However, this moment is mostly only notable because of the use of Life Among the Distant Stars from Partners in Crime, so it's not really this serial itself that makes such an emotional flashback actually resonate with the viewer, rather just another story's good music. It then turns out that Rivesh is the alien Aslak and Stark are after, since Stark just strolls in and captures them all. I don't really know how he found them. Seems like it's just a strangely convenient way to move the plot forward.
On behalf of the United States government, thank you for leading us to this alien.
The reason Aslak and Stark want Rivesh is because he's a scientist specialising in genetic warfare, which isn't great news. He has engineered a weapon to wipe out the entire Viperox race, which essentially means the conflict between the Viperox and the Grey Aliens mirrors the Cold War, since Stark wants to use it to wipe out all the Russians. I don't think this Cold War subtext is given nearly enough time, because it's a fascinating piece of history with so much tension. Like the episode Cold War would later focus on, the entire conflict was perpetually on a knife's edge because of mutually assured destruction. If either the US or Russia launched their nuclear arsenal, they would do so knowing their enemy would follow suit, wiping out both at the very same time. The fear and paranoia of being destroyed is what leads to people like Stark becoming so desperate to just wipe out all the Russians before they can retaliate. So it's a good villain motivation, if heavily underexplored. And also, we all know what the Doctor thinks about genocide given his many encounters with the concept up until this point. Mr. Dread then arrives with a weapon, although the Doctor immediately steals it back and goes for a bit of a run. There's a really good standoff as he's cornered by Stark, desperately trying to get the Colonel to see the error of his ways. The Doctor does two very good things here. Firstly, he acknowledges the trope of human villains being betrayed by alien villains. The Doctor has seen it play out time and time again, so he knows exactly what's coming if Stark continues to help the Viperox. It's a good way to capitalise on the trope rather than falling back into old habits. The other great part about this moment is that the Doctor appeals to Stark's patriotism. He genuinely believes he's saving the world by working with Aslak to destroy the Russians. The Doctor knows this, so by mentioning the betrayal and suggesting that Stark is actually dooming the world, he can get through to the Colonel and convince him to stop this madness, so it's a clever move. Indeed, Stark calls off the helicopters and demands his soldiers arrest Aslak, although the Viperox leader is right there with them. Handy that. Again, the Doctor gives the Viperox a final chance to leave, because we all know what kind of person the 10th Doctor is.
No second chances. I'm that sort of a man.
With Rivesh seemingly dead at Aslak's hands, or rather pincers, the protagonists need to go to Saruba's ship in the vault so she can save him. Indeed, this vault is essentially the same one as we saw at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. References like these are nice, so I'm glad they didn't have the Doctor ruin the subtle callback by quipping something stupid about Indiana Jones. However, they're not alone in the warehouse, as they're attacked by the Scorpius flies, a carnivorous swarm hive mind jellyfish thing. I find it weird that they introduced this brand new monster so late in the story. I like the idea of aliens being loose in the mysterious vault, since it feels like something that would genuinely happen in a place with so many artifacts and monsters, but it all feels a bit too sudden. It's just kind of there for a minute, before the plot instantly does away with it as the Doctor and Saruba do their best Metal Gear Solid impression. So what was the point of all of this? I just think this vault side plot is tacked on to pad the runtime. It doesn't contribute nearly enough to the story to feel worthwhile. They also just kind of leave the Scorpius flies in there, so good luck to whoever has to go in there next. Back outside, there's an all-out war between the army and the Viperox. It's quite an exciting, action-packed sequence, forming a suitable big-time climax to the serial. The animation helps to deliver a much bigger scale than live action could, and gives it the high stakes it deserves for such an ambitious battle. However, I can't help but feel like the entire thing should have been a base under siege story, with the Viperox trying to destroy Area 51 from the get-go, meaning the Doctor has to use plenty of alien gadgets and a ragtag group of alien captives to stop the monsters. As it stands, the majority of the story doesn't do nearly enough with the potential animation offers. The Infinite Quest had made sure to use the media for lots of new environments and did so extremely well, but Dreamland essentially tries to just be a live action episode in an awkward 3D animation format, so it doesn't do enough in my opinion. Only really getting interesting right near the end with this climactic battle. It's clear the humans are losing, but the Doctor has the TARDIS ready to go, with Jimmy once again giving an award-winning reaction to seeing a tiny little box of a massive spaceship console room squeezed inside.
Holy smokes.
Move over Rose, Martha and Donna, your reactions are nothing compared to this masterpiece. I do find it funny that we still barely get to see the console room even though this is animated. During the specials they try to limit its screen time since it wasn't a set designed with HD in mind, but you don't need to worry about that with animation, yet they still barely show off the interior. I just find that a bit funny, especially because you could do interesting stuff with the TARDIS when it comes to animation. Maybe they could show us other rooms, or even just tell us where the doors are to move around, because that's something that will always annoy me when it comes to this TARDIS console room as much as I love it. Thanks to the TARDIS, the Doctor is able to get inside the besieged Area 51, allowing Saruba to resurrect Ravesh through the power of some magic sphere thing. Are you going to explain what that is? No?
Alright then, keep your secrets.
Now Ravesh wants to use his weapon to destroy the Viperox once and for all, which the Doctor is obviously against. This would be mass genocide on a universe-wide scale, so it reminds me a lot of the end of Parting of the Ways, where the Doctor had the power to wipe out every Dalek in the universe. Back then he hadn't done it because it would mean destroying the humans as well, but this time he refuses simply because it's not something the Doctor would do. Instead, he'd probably just subtly convince someone else to.
Sometime, ha! One.
I honestly don't think they do enough with this dilemma. He never reaches a point where he at least considers it, which I think lessens the stakes. He doesn't want to wipe out the Viperox because they're still evolving. Eventually they will reach a point where they stop warring. But really, Doctor, are you sure? Some species just like to fight. I don't see the Daleks settling down tending to a farmstead on the outskirts of New Skaro City, do you? It is an interesting window into the character's desperation to see hope in every situation. The Davis era itself is pessimistic with a sheen of optimism, but the Doctor never seems to waver in the belief everyone is capable of becoming better, almost projecting his own regrets onto them, because he too has done deplorable things but grown as a person afterwards. Rather than aiming to wipe out the Viperox, the Doctor has altered the weapon and plugs it into the TARDIS's sound system to attack the Viperox's nervous system. I suppose it's quite a clever solution. Throughout the story we've been told that they have powerful, sensitive hearing, so it's a good way for the Doctor to save everyone at the end. It's not like Planet of the Dead where the gravity clamps conveniently just show up to let the protagonist escape. This is something that has been consistently seeded throughout, so it's a logical and satisfying way to stop the alien threat, forcing the Viperox to run away and leave the planet to protect their precious ears. Although that just makes me feel like they'll come back with even more soldiers and wipe out the entire planet for revenge. Better hope the Doctor is around when that happens. Maybe this time he can play caramel dancing to keep them away for good. With a day saved, everyone goes their separate ways. The grey aliens leaving in their ship, Stark returning to the base, and the Doctor heading back to his lonely TARDIS. Cassie and Jimmy are also conveniently paired off because apparently you're not allowed to have two characters of the opposite sex be platonic friends. I do find it interesting that there's never a question of them becoming companions. Other episodes around this time stress the fact that the Doctor was now travelling alone and wanted it to stay that way for the sake of not losing anyone else. Sure, nobody out there expected Cassie and Jimmy to actually become full-time companions, and I'm truly glad they didn't because they're so useless, but I just find it strange that the serial doesn't even slightly contemplate the idea for even a second. They just kind of peace out. Dreamland is a bad piece of Doctor Who media. I literally built this channel off the back of defending bad stuff from Doctor Who, and even I can't find anything to redeem Dreamland. It's truly awful in almost every way. Even though I like the setting and the general idea of the plot, it's not well written, with pointless tangents and too much going on. The animation is unforgivably bad. It looks good in some action scenes, but whenever people are on the screen it looks like the early drafts of the scrapped Clone Wars Season 6 episodes. It's so janky and borderline unwatchable, something made even worse with terrible lip syncing. It's not just the animation either. Despite a mostly solid cast, the voice acting is incredibly bad. The talents of David Tennant, Georgia Tennant and David Warner are wasted with a pretty terrible script. They seriously brought in Georgia Tennant with top billing and didn't do a Jenny storyline, instead making her speak with an abysmal American accent.
My mom, she used to run this place, thought it would bring in the tourists.
It's borderline insulting voice acting all throughout. Dreamland easily earns the first ever E rank I've ever given on this channel. If it had been a book or an audio drama, it would be a solid, if forgettable story. But the fact they wasted the opportunity for an animation will never sit right with me. Every aspect and decision was mishandled. The animation style was a mistake. The music was just reused pieces from the show, and the whole cast was wasted. Dreamland isn't even a fun oddity within the Doctor Who landscape like Infinite Quest was. It's a bland and horrible mess of a serial, only held up by a very few small positives. Seriously, don't watch this. It's not even bad in a good way. Just steer clear of it, your life will be better as a result.
I cannot be seeing that.
And I'd like to thank my Platinum level patron Fallon Cortez and all my Gold level patrons Alex Marston, Calvin, Daniel Shilato, Franz Horn aka Line Vortex, George, Herna Verzog, James Alea Waterhouse, John and Stephen Never Miller. Thank you so much for your support.